In this video, we are going to talk about $apply and $digest available in AngularJS. In order to understand these, you need to have some understanding about how the data bindings work in AngularJS, a bit more about watchers and digest cycle and loop and so on, which have been covered in much more depth and detail in my previous videos. So if you are not familiar with any of these, I highly recommend to go through my previous videos which covers all of those topics much in depth. Okay, let's jump on to the first slide. And I just wanted to give some quick overview about digest process of AngularJS here. And I grabbed this slide from my previous video, which essentially gives us a complete overview of Angular digest cycle. I'm not going to explain this whole diagram as it was already explained clearly in my previous video, but there are a couple of things we need to be aware of before even trying to work with or trying to understand how $apply and $digest really works. The first thing is that we know that the data bindings happen after digest process. So which means digest process will be essentially going through all the watch lists, and if there are no more modifications to be really keeping track of, then it actually pushes that information to update the DOM, and from there it actually goes to the DOM render process. And this digest process will be kicked in as long as it falls into the Angular context. So which means if you happen to modify scope variables using any of these like ngClick or $HTTP or $timeout or in our case $apply or whatever, those will be automatically kicking in this process called digest process. And this digest process is responsible to watch or to look after or to keep track of all those values of the scope variables to make sure that they are really being modified, and at the same time all the modifications really get applied to the respective UI. And that responsibility is automatically taken care by digest process. And this digest process is going to be kicked in if and only if you use any of these as part of Angular context. Okay. There is an important note here, DOM events which are not related to Angular. So in this case you can see, imagine I am having jQuery related onClick, which I might be writing somewhere inside this JavaScript. So if I have jQuery related onClick events, or if you have direct browser based events like set timeout or intervals or whatever, then those are really working outside of the Angular context. So if you happen to still access the scope variables and modify them outside the Angular context, then those are not automatically kept track of because the digest process is not going to be kicking in. So if you modify any of those scope variables outside the Angular context, even though the values get changed, those are not automatically updated as part of UI. So this is pretty important. The UI gets updated, the view gets updated by AngularJS if and only if the digest process completes. And this digest process can understand only the context of AngularJS and from these particular bridges available. So if there is anything which is outside this bridge and outside the Angular context, it will not kick in the process of digest process, and thus you will not see UI getting updated. So this is pretty much in simple about how the digest process really works within AngularJS and how it is not going to be kicked in whenever you are outside AngularJS. So let us now really focus on $apply and $digest. Okay, so first of all, again, this part is actually grabbed from my previous video. So every particular scope is going to have its own watch list, including the root scope. So if you're not familiar with watches or watch lists, please refer to my previous videos. So $apply or $digest. Any of these two, whenever you use with a scope, they actually kick in the digest process manually. So which means if the digest process is automatically being kicked in, and if the developer needs to have the digest process to be kicked in, which means you wanted to invoke the digest process manually, then you are going to use either of these two, the $apply or $digest. And these two are mainly used whenever you would like to have the scope variables which are modified outside the Angular context. So which means if you are trying to modify the scope variables using jQuery events or some other set timeout related events or some other jQuery Ajax events which are out of the Angular context, then it is going to be the responsibility of the developer to ensure that the respective digest process is always invoked so that the UI gets updated with the latest values which are made available as part of scope. And this is pretty important, the third one. Behind the scenes, whether you use $apply or not, it actually uses $digest, which means if you call $apply inside $apply, internally it is going to call $digest. So you can either work with $digest or $apply, doesn't matter. But if you work with $apply, behind the scenes it actually calls $digest. We are going to see the difference between these two, when to use what, but it is important to know that $apply always calls $digest internally. And how to use $apply or $digest is quite simple. As long as you have access to scope variable, just providing dot, you can ask it to actually call $apply or $digest in this manner. So this is how you can use $apply or $digest to really invoke the digest process manually. Okay, so now let us think about $apply completely. I'm not referring to $digest anymore, but this is simply about $apply. First of all, the digest process will be invoked always on root scope. You can see the digest process, whenever it is going to kick in, it always starts at root scope the moment you use $apply. It doesn't mean it is going to end at root scope, but it starts with root scope, completes its watch list parsing, and from there it goes to the child level scopes, completes each of those, and further it goes to the nested scopes and completes each of those. So the digest process will be always invoked right from the root scope, always whenever you use $apply. That is pretty important. And next one is, whether or not you use $apply, behind the scenes, whenever you try to use ngClick event or any other AngularJS related events, $timeout or $HTTP with callbacks and so on, they actually call $apply at the end of the logic. So whether you use ngClick or timeout or HTTP or so on, behind the scenes, internally inside AngularJS, all of these will be executing $apply, and that is the reason why the digest process automatically gets kicked in whenever you use any of these. So if you use any of these, $apply kicks in, and that actually invokes the digest process all the way from the root scope. And the next one is $digest. So this is almost similar to $apply, except that the digest is going to be kicking in on the current scope only. So it doesn't start with root scope always. So if you are on the current scope and if you use $scope.digest, it actually tries to kick in the digest process only for that scope. So it's not going to be affecting any other scope related watch list, but it actually does invoke the digest process only on the current scope, and then further it actually goes to the updating of DOM only for the current scope. This is mainly used to improve the performance of your entire single page application whenever you have too many number of scopes and you do not really need all of the scopes to be updated, when you are pretty sure that only one scope really needs to have the values to be updated in the UI. And this I already mentioned, like it doesn't really starts from root scope or any other parent scope. So whenever you use $scope, if this $scope refers to this one, it actually does that. If actually does with this one, it does with this scope along with the internal one as well. So it doesn't stop for the current scope. It actually goes through the current scope and all of the children and the nested ones. Okay, and it could be called from root scope also. So if you have the reference to $root scope and if you call $root scope.$digest, it is as good as really calling $scope.apply. So whether you use $scope.apply or whether you use $root scope.digest, those are almost similar. Okay, so now that we have some understanding about $apply and $digest, I think the next thing is we need to have some practical scenario on how we can demonstrate these capabilities. Okay, so I have a simple HTML which actually has a controller assigned to EMP. So you can see I have an EMP defined with two scope variables A and B. And those two are currently made available in the form of text box and a one-way binding. So which means this is a read-only binding and this is a read-only binding. However, I have read-write binding here and another read-write binding here for both A and B respectively. So let me get this one out using my browser here. And now you can see I have both of the variables. So let me open my developer tools. Let me clear. Let me refresh this. And now you can see my developer tools are ready with those two values. So the moment I say 10 and the moment I say 20, you can see these two are automatically updated because those are actually working with ng model. So ng model actually kicks in the digest process automatically, and it knows that once clicking on the ng model, or once you are modifying the ng model related expression, at the end of evaluation of that expression, it actually calls the digest process, and the digest process will be updating the UI, and thus this gets updated automatically. So ng model behind the scenes actually calls $apply, and that is the reason we have it. But imagine I am actually trying to modify manually. So I go to my body, get hold of this controller, and I come in here, and now I am going to say angular.element of $0. So $0 is essentially the Chrome related a feature where it really gives you access to the currently highlighted element. So if you click on this guy, you are actually getting the reference of that element using $0. So this is not jQuery, this is Chrome related feature. So the moment I type in there, you can see I'm actually getting the reference of that one here. Okay, let me clear again, and now I can get the scope of that particular element. So I can say scope, so which actually gives me scope related variables like A and B. So you have A value as 10 and B value as 20. So let me clear everything, and now let me try to modify the value of B to something like 40. Okay, now I modified the scope and the variable B to a new value called 40. So let me check my scope again. I open the scope of the current element, and you can see A value is 10, which is the same thing. B value is 40. However, this is not getting updated because you are modifying the scope variable B outside the Angular context. Whenever I say Angular context, you are actually modifying inside the console. So this console has got no access to Angular context, and Angular context doesn't know of any kind of activity you do inside the console. So even though you are able to access the scope variables here and still happen to modify the value of those variables using the console, it doesn't go inside the Angular context, and thus the digest process doesn't know that it has to be kicked in. So the digest process is not at all invoked, and the UI is not being updated at all. So even though you happen to modify the values of the scope variables outside the AngularJS context, as long as you do not invoke the digest process, you are not going to get the UI updated. Now, how do I get the UI updated? So very simply, as we know, we have the manual way of asking the digest process to be invoked. So the moment I say this one, I'm saying that please go to the root scope and kick in the digest process for this particular element. So the moment I press enter, and now you can see the value of B has been automatically modified. Not only that, now even if I say something like A, let us consider I'm modifying A to something like 100, and at the same time I'm modifying B to 200. So I modified both of those, but none of them are appearing here. But the moment I say apply, you can see the entire UI gets updated as because the digest process has kicked in. Okay, now that we have some understanding of the $apply here, we need to understand on how we can really make use of it as part of our particular application. So in this case, I would like to have a new button here. In this case, I would like to call this button as something like calculate sum. So I would like to have some sum to be calculated, and in this case I would like to have ngClick to be used, and I would like to call calculate sum method against the scope. So this is a simple one, and of course I need to have the sum to be displayed, and thus I am going to have sum to be displayed using a new scope variable called s. So I need to define calculate sum, and I need to define s in my scope. So I go back to my A01JS, and the first thing is that I would like to have the default value of sum to be actually specified as 0. So that is the sum by default, and I would like to have the calculate sum to be defined in the form of a function here which actually calculates the sum of a and b and places the value inside s. So I'm going to say something like this. Okay, so I just saved everything, and I also saved this one, and let me go to my browser. I refresh this, and now let us see. I modify the value of 10 and I modify the value of 20, and now I am going to say calculate sum, and now you can see I have 10, 20. Oh, okay, because it is trying to concatenate 10 and 20 here. If you really want to, probably you can just modify this one to something like number, something like this, so that you are trying to convert the strings to number, and probably it can give a better result rather than simply concatenating. And the moment I do, you can say got sum. So let me go back here and try to modify the same way I said earlier. So I modified. Okay, I need to highlight that. So let me highlight this one. So now I am specifying a value as 100 and b value as 200. And now I'm going to click on calculate sum, and now you can see not only did calculate the sum, but it actually did update all of this. So from this we can easily understand, like ngClick, you can see that our ngClick, whatever you used in here, behind the scenes, even though it calculates all of this, it actually kicks in $apply, and that is the result why we have the entire UI updated, because the digest process has been kicked in. Okay, we are fine with this one, but still I did not use $apply in my application. So how can I make use of it? In order to make use of the $apply, you should really try to update it outside the Angular context. But ngClick works within the Angular context, and we don't need $apply. So let me define another button, and I would like to call this one as just sum. You can place whatever the caption you would like to have, and I would like to define something like this: on click button click, and I just wanted to execute this guy. And you can see this is a DOM event, and I just would like to execute a DOM function, and this whole part is not related to Angular at all. So now I go to A01, that is my AngularJS here, and now I'm going to define. It doesn't need to be an AngularJS. Why? Because this is just a plain function. You can define it even within your HTML also. This one doesn't need to be part of A01.js, but I just wanted to make this one as a global function. This is not related to AngularJS or app at all. So in this case, I just wanted to have the element div. So you can see the name of or the ID of my div is div1. I just wanted to get hold of it using jQuery or using Angular element, just like I did in my console. So I'm going to say angular.element, and using jQuery reference, I would like to have div1 to be retrieved using jQuery. And once I got hold of element, I would like to have the scope to be retrieved, and I would like to store that in $scope or whatever the variable you mention here. This could be A or B. So now I have the scope of that particular element div1. Now I can modify the value of it. So in this case, I would like to have something like scope.s equal to this whole thing. So I can easily write that right here. So let me see what's going on here. So using this scope, I'm getting the current value available in A and current value available in B, summing it up and placing in $scope.s, which means s is the variable. So I'm not doing anything here other than just calculating and placing the value inside s. So I go back to this, just refresh this one. Okay, so this is our button which has got no relation with AngularJS. So let me go in here and let me see how the scope is available currently. So I select, okay, I always forget this, so I need to highlight the element, and again I select scope, and now you can see I have the s value of 0, which is default. So let me go in here, I do this, let me clear both of those, and again I do the scope, and now you can see I should have A and B but not S, and S can be calculated certainly. Now I click on sum, and this is being done outside the AngularJS context. So I click on here, so which means sum should have been done by now. So I again check the scope, I open this one, you can see the sum is right there. It has calculated 10 plus 20 as 30, but it did not update this value because even though you modified yes, it is outside the scope of AngularJS, and thus you can simply fix it by saying $scope.$apply. So which means after manipulating all the values of the scope in whatever the way you want it, after modifying all the values, you just kick in the digest process, which knows that it has to update the UI once all the watchers has been passed. So let me refresh this, and now I set 10 and 20, and the moment I click on sum, now you can see 30 has been automatically done. So this is how you can use $apply, and you can use $apply if and only if you are outside the context of AngularJS. And there are a couple more syntaxes of using it. So instead of writing these two statements, you can have $apply to be having its own function. So which means it tries to execute this function before even trying to execute the apply. So I can just use this one right here. So which means $apply says that please execute this function, and after the completing of this function, please execute $apply. So even this should work with no issues. So I refresh this, I modified something like 200 and click on sum. You can see $apply still works with no issues. Okay, now that we understood on how to work with $apply, now is the time to work with $digest. So we did not use $digest in our application. So I already had some write-up on $digest. So let me grab that and push inside this one. Okay, so let me close all of this. Now let me open A01, A01JS, and my template. So I'm opening all those three here. Okay, so this is a simple one where I'm using ng repeat. So which means I'm going to have a repeat here, and that is actually going through all the objects available in the data available at scope level. So if you go to a01.js, you can see I have data variable which is having a collection, array in this case, array of 4 objects. So it has got 4 objects, and each object has got properties v and r. Essentially I mean value and result. So you can see those 4 objects are going to be repeated here, and for each and every iteration I am going to have O, which means for each and every iteration of this data every object will be actually stored inside O, and I am trying to access this O inside my custom directive called message. So if you see that, you can see I have a custom directive called message, which is using a template available in info.msg, where inside this all I am saying is that just get the value available inside the property V of the current object O, which is currently nothing but the iterated object of that particular data. So if I have 4 objects, then you are going to have this template to be evaluated for 4 times, and thus I'm going to have 4 values to be displayed. So let us quickly test this and see if it is working. So now you can see I have all the 4 values to be displayed here, 17, 24, 32, 48. So if you go back here, you can see I have all these 4 values to be displayed using the same template. So I define one template and it is being repeated for 4 times. Okay. So this is using custom directives. So if you're not familiar with custom directives, please refer to my previous videos. Okay, now is the time to actually work with our $apply and $digest in this case. So let us start with button click. As we know, I can have any kind of markup here. So in this case, I just would like to have a button, and again, very similar to my previous example, I would like to have calculate sum, and on click I would like to execute button click on the scope. So which means this actually works with AngularJS context because you are using ng click. And as part of this, I would like to have the result also. So in this case, just like our previous sum, I would like to display the result to be immediately after the button. So, and of course I need to still define button click, and let me go to my message, and here I can have the controller to be defined with my own controller to be defined with my own button click event or method. So I am going to say function where I have access to scope, element, and attributes. Of course, not all of those are compulsory. Just in this case, I am using only scope, so I just wanted to make use of it. Scope.buttonClick equal to function, and now I would like to have the value available in V to be multiplied with the same value, which means I'm trying to accomplish the square of value V, and I would like to have the result to be placed in scope.o.r. So which means please get the value available in V of current object O. Again, multiply the same value and place inside R, which means you are replacing the current object related property R with the latest value, which is nothing but the square of these two. And finally, that needs to be placed inside O. So which is nothing but you are updating the scope with few values. So let us go back here and refresh this. And now you can see I have every row displayed based on the current template. So you can see the template has the first value, the button, and the result. So this template will be applied for all the objects available in data. So I go back here. Now the moment I click in here, now you can see I have, it's supposed to be calculate product, not calculate sum. So I can say probably a better one. Where is mine? So instead of calculate sum, I can say calculate square. So that is more appropriate. Okay, that's not sum. We are not summing up here. So now you can see it is actually doing the square of it, and now we have the square. But again, we did not use $apply or $digest here because we know that ng-click automatically kicks digest process, so we don't need $apply or $digest here. Now let us consider I would like to have a simple button not related to ng-click. So I would like to say a normal button, and I just wanted to say square, and I would like to use a DOM event. So for that, I just wanted to identify the button as ID. So in this case, button sum is being identified by ID. So I cannot use onClick right away or straight away here. Of course, I can still use it, but I just wanted to make use of the post link and the compile options available in AngularJS. So I just would like to refer this one straight into my post link. So that is the linking function I am talking about. So as part of this, I can go with compile. So this compile can actually return a linking function, nothing but a post link function, which has access to all of these. And by the way, if you are not familiar with compile or link or post link, please refer to my previous videos. Okay, now I can access the DOM element of I, which means if you are at the third iteration, you are going to have the third instance of this template, and you can access that instance using the I element. So using I element, by the way, this is nothing but a jQuery element here by default. I can find my button. Let me see what is the name of the button. So you have button sum. So in the current instance, I'm trying to get the reference to button and on click, so which means this is a jQuery click event, and I would like to execute the scope related button click event. So this is as good as that. So what I'm saying here is that I'm accessing button sum. So for every new instance of this template, I'm accessing this button sum, attaching an event handler to that, and event handler being button click automatically. And this is a jQuery event, so which means it will be working out of the Angular context. And even though you are actually assigning the value or modifying the value of R, it is not going to be shown automatically. So because it is working outside of Angular context. So let's prove it. So I just refresh this. Now you can see I have square. So let me access a particular element here. So in this case, probably the third element. So I click on that. I wanted to get the scope of it. And let me go to the scope. You have the object O. And now you can see the value of R is 0. The value of V is 32, obviously. And let me click square. Yes, I clicked it. It should have done its process. So let me again do this. So I open the scope of the current one, which is nothing but the third one in this case. I open O, and you can see the result has been calculated, which means 32 into 32 becomes 1024. The value of R has been modified by my function, but it was not immediately made available here because it did not digest, which means it did not kick in the process of digest process, or digest cycle did not come into the picture. So in order to accomplish that, I had to say $apply. So I can simply say that $digest. So you can use $digest or $apply here, but if I use $apply, still it works. So it doesn't matter whether you use $apply or $digest in this case, but there exists one difference. That is, you may not really see the difference, but we need to understand how it does. So let me click a square here. Now you can see it is actually doing all the process. Okay, let me refresh this whole thing again. So we are out of it. So let me go to the second one. So that is, this is the third one. So I go to the second one. And now I am going to say like dot R equal to some value like 999. So I don't care what it is, but you can see that I am actually modifying the second row but not the third row. So modified the R to 999 and press enter. Okay, now I click on the third row. I modified the second row, but I am clicking on the third row. So the moment I click on the third row, you can see it has not only calculated the result of this one, but the previous one, whatever the value I placed in here, also did appear because I used $apply. So $apply actually starts from the root scope. So whenever I mention root scope, it actually starts from here. So it calculates, it watches for all the values, and if there exists any value changes inside the scope, it immediately updates the DOM. So even though you are clicking on this button, as you are working with $apply, it actually updates the entire root scope, which means your entire UI in this case. But let me consider I'm just using only digest. Let me refresh this. Okay, we are back. Now again, let me select the second one. This is the first one and this is the second one. So I select it. Now I modify the value to 999 and now I click on the third, and now you can see it applied only for the current scope. Even though the value has been modified in the previous scope, it did not, because our particular digest process kicked in only for the third but not from the root scope, and thus even though you modify 999 did not come into the picture here. So every scope really works in here. So in this way actually you can improve the performance, saying that if you click on this square, please apply or kick in the digest process only for this row, as because I'm pretty sure that all the values in this case actually work only for this one. So that is pretty important. So if you're pretty sure that your particular scope modifications are going to be taking place only for the current scope, you always use $digest instead of $apply. Okay, so let me take this to the next level. Like for example, I would like to have another div here, and in this case I would like to have some total to be calculated. So I would like to call a scope related function called gettotal. So this is the scope related function at the root controller, the main controller, to be executed and calculating the total of all the values available inside R. So I would like to have a total of all these R's. So let me go in here and right here. So I would like to have something like $scope.getTotal function. In this case I would start with sum initially with 0, and I return the sum, and for each I in $scope data.length and I greater than 0 I minus 1, so that should be fine. And now I should be able to get the variable O from the current scope related data object of the index I, and I would like to have the sum to be calculated based on the value available inside R, and finally return the S. So let me select this one. So this should be it. So let me refresh this. Okay, now you can see I have the total. Now I say calculate square, and now okay, so I have some problem somewhere, so let me see what it is. So okay, I had to switch off this, so it cannot accept all of these at once. So the digest is already running there because I am using ngClick. So in this case you can see if I click on ngClick, the digest happens automatically, but at the same time I am saying that please do the digest again, so which is going to be giving us the problems. So let me refresh this, and now I am going to say calculate square, and now you can see for every click on the calculate square, all of these values, the sum of all these values are automatically calculated and provided at the very last. Okay, now how about this square? So I don't want to use this, of course. Let me use this guy, and let me use this one as well. And as you can see, it actually applies only for the current scope but not for the entire root scope. And if you go back to your HTML, this doesn't actually go under the current scope of the current object O. This is outside, this part is outside this div, so this doesn't go inside this scope. That is important. So I go back here, press F5, and I click on this square. You can see individually all the squares are working, But this total is not getting updated because the digest works only for this scope, but not the root scope or not the parent scope. But this one is outside these scopes available. So this actually sits somewhere outside the divs or outside this scope, and thus this one doesn't get calculated. But you can still fix it by just saying, instead of $digest, $apply, as because it calculates all the way from the root scope. So now I save it, I return back here, but I say 5, and now you click square and you should be able to see all of those automatically getting calculated. So hopefully, I guess you understood the difference between $apply and $digest. The only difference is that $digest applies only to the current scope, and it will simply neglect any other scope beyond the current scope and its children, whereas $apply really works all the way from root scope.